So today, guys, we are going to talk about a sponge filter versus a hang-on-the-back filter. Sponge filters are driven by air. Air is pumped into the center of the sponge where there's an air stone. Air displaces water in the sponge. As the air rises through the lift tube, it pulls water up with it, forcing more water through the sponge toward the air stone. The sponge collects particles floating in the water and houses beneficial bacteria, which grows in that highly oxygenated environment. And it's held in place by a weighted base or suction cups depending on the brand and the model. A hang-on-the-back water is pumped up into the filter body using a small motor and impeller. It flows through media, which is usually a filter cartridge, but not always. It gets returned to the aquarium by gravity. The cartridge provides mechanical filtration, some chemical filtration with activated carbon, and biological filtration until it's replaced. Let's talk about money with these two. For these, I'm using a 29-gallon tank as an example. A sponge filter is extremely cost effective, assuming you already have an air pump, air tubing, and an air stone laying around that you're not using. They range in price from $4.99 to $12.99 depending on which one you want to get. I picked a Bacto Surge high density foam filter. It was $8.30 and it was well oversized for 29 gallons. With everything you need, the air pump, the tubing, and the air stone, it was only $23 to get a sponge filter up and running. A hang-on-the-back, also very cost-effective. An Aqueon Quiet Flow was $18.99, with most going around $20 for a 29-gallon aquarium. The average cost is about the same on both of these filters. If you have to buy everything, if you already have the air pump, it's very, very cheap to get a sponge filter up and going. Appearance. With a sponge filter, everything but the air pump is in the aquarium. It takes up space, and it's very bulky and awkward looking. There's just no way to make a sponge filter look good in an aquarium. There just isn't. Now, hang on the back, you have an uptake pipe in the aquarium, possibly the entire filter body, depending on the model, and possibly a box housing the filter impeller, again, depending on the model. So quite a bit of equipment in the aquarium with both of these. Pros of each. Sponge filters are super easy to clean, easy to access. They are great biofilter. They are fantastic for fry because you don't have any motors or impellers or anything for your fry to get sucked up in. You can run multiple sponge filters on larger air pumps. You get good surface agitation, and you kind of get double duty out of it because you have not only a filter but an air stone all in one thing. And you get lots of customization and modifications and easy DIY for sponge filters. Hang on the backs, they're small, they're easy to access, easy to clean, you get good surface agitation depending on the model, and they're easy to use. They're a staple in the hobby and have been for a long time, both of these filters. The cons: sponge filter is super bulky in the aquarium. The air pump to run it can be loud and vibrate depending on what it's sitting on. You need a lid of some type to stop bubbles from causing a mist outside of the aquarium where you get that backsplash when the bubbles burst at the surface. It can be a mess trying to take a sponge filter out of a tank and clean it, with creating a big old cloud and really just making a big mess when you take them out to try to squeeze out the sponge. And the suction cup models often don't hold in place very well and end up just falling off. Hang on the back filters are bulky in the aquarium depending on the model. The filter becomes clogged and loses performance easily. They're not easily customized. There's very little room for media. They can also be loud and vibrate at times. You can't really add things on to a hang on the back as easily, and some people claim they disrupt CO2 in planted aquariums, which I think is minuscule at best. Sponge filter customization. I couldn't do a sponge filter justice without showing you ways that they can be customized. There are all different types of sponge filters and ways to set them up. You can make your own sponge filter, you can run it with air, you can stick a power head down in the lift tube and run it on a power head so you have that forced flow and higher flow rate. You can adjust the lift tube by adding an elbow to the top of it to affect the flow and cause the flow to run out across the surface instead of straight up and down. all kinds of things to do with sponge filters. Plus, you have different shapes. You have dual sponge filters, you have single sponge filters, you have sponge filters made to sit in the corner of an aquarium, all kinds of stuff with these things. In my opinion, for fish rooms or those with a lot of aquariums, sponge filters are the way to go, as long as your aquariums aren't show tanks. They're cost effective. You get one linear piston pump from Gemco or something similar, and you can effectively filter an entire room with sponge filters on the cheap, only having one electronic device running to filter your tanks. For those with single tanks or only 2 or 3 tanks, I think hang-on backs are more beneficial than sponge filters, just for the sake of having to run all those air pumps. And very often, if you only have a couple tanks, they're your show tanks. They're things that you want to show off and you want to have them looking good, and you just don't get that as easily with a sponge filter. For those breeding fish, you need a sponge filter all day long. There is not a better filter for fry than a sponge filter. I prefer sponge filters for quarantine systems. The reason being, whenever you're done quarantining with it, it's easier to sanitize a sponge filter to be reused again for quarantine. It's easy to combine 2 filters with a sponge filter, or simply add a power head to a sponge for more flow, or add an intake sponge to a hang-on back, and you basically have a combination of both of these filters. One benefit to a sponge filter, you can store unused sponge filters in a non-display tank or a sump or something like that and keep them cycled and have cycled filters ready for future use.